the furthest point you can possibly see. The furthest possible point. How do we do that? How do we look out as far as possible? Because when you look out as far as possible, first of all, you can't always do this because your observation of the world is also narrow-sighted. Vision of the world is being blocked by the most immediate and closest object constantly. And technology doesn't help with this. I mean, we're always looking at screens and we're always being confronted with things that come at us. And this is evolutionary and we have to delineate from them and move them and avoid them. And our body's an dynamical organism that adapted to its environment, and its adaptations are simply these direct, indirect, immediate, non-immediate, contact, non-contact interaction with things, and it has to move and stay and stop. But if you do the exercise of looking out at the furthest possible point, it doesn't have to be looking out into the horizon, although that is a way more complicated perspective of what I'm trying to say. But rather go into a road, for example, a neighborhood, and look down the road where there's a lot of houses. So houses are all, lined up beside each other, and they just extend all the way downwards into the end of the road. Usually the end of the road could be like an intersecting road. You know what I mean? Like an intersecting road. And this is the best environment to do this exercise in, looking out to the furthest point, is because it's a very rudimentary environment. Do this in a very rudimentary environment that involves very basic interactions of figure and plane. So you look out and then you have this length measure going out away from you as furthest possible. And this wavelength measure is intersected by a set of discernible objects. The intersecting measure, which, let's say your line is vertical, which is going forward, and what you're observing is ultimately horizontal. And these two measures, if we take them separate from one another, they seem to bear different directions of two separate determinations. But if we can join them together, well, now you have kind of like an axis. So it's our very basic XY axis. And this axis is two-dimensional. The XY axis is two-dimensional. And ironically, when you look out very far, and the way you look out very far, before I say what happens when you look out very far, the way you look out very far is you look out into the furthest object you can see, but then realize that there's also a slightly further object that you can't see. You see, so you're looking out as furthest as possible and you see this building, let's say in the horizon, it's a far away building, it looks like a little speck, and you're like, but wait, there is like trees behind that thing, right? But what's behind those trees? Well, it goes even, and it's a horizon, and that's far-sighted. If the mind only sees the world in that way, well, you bump into things and you don't see the things immediate. You don't have the best vision. So the eyes are not, nearsighted, nor are they far-sighted. They're like an intermediary between, where you see the furthest discernible thing away from you, so you have an idea of where to go. You have an aim and a goal, and you can observe that at the distance. But then you also have to worry about things that are near to you, and that your eyes have to have nearsighted vision of, like whether you bump into something. So you're not bumping into something, constantly going towards the object at the furthest position, and you're bumping into all these things. You're seeing them and you're maneuvering them, dodging them to get to there. Obviously, every time you get there, now there's a further observation of different indiscernible set of objects within an environment, or rather a wavelength. But what you ultimately see when you look out at the furthest object and realize that there's something further from it that you can't see, that it's indiscernible, what you start seeing is that place that you took to be furthest away from the furthest object, which you can't see, is actually now two-dimensional. Do you know that? It's actually two-dimensional, and it's no longer three-dimensional. Now think of what I just said right now. Try to try to understand it. Don't just say, well, what does that mean? That means something. What, I don't know what it means. Try to understand what it means.